It's not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. As Joe Biden lands in Israel today, as fears mount that this could escalate in the Middle East, I'm going to be asking the question, is he really fit to lead the free world? We'll be joined, amongst others, by John Bolton on that. We'll get a former spokesperson from the Palestinian Authority to put their side of the argument in this conflict. And I'll be joined by a Tory MP who has caused uproar in the House of Commons today. She suggested that people who come to the country illegally should be sent home. All of that after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Well, the top story tonight is that the US President Joe Biden has been speaking in Israel today, where he's announced an agreement to allow humanitarian aid to move from Egypt into Gaza. He also confirmed $100 million worth of new US funding for that aid to go into Gaza and the West Bank. President Biden's visit to Israel was meant to prevent an escalation of the conflict in the wider region. But after last night's bombing of a hospital in Gaza, planned meetings with regional leaders have had to be cancelled, although Mr Biden has met with Israel's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, later on in a speech, he stressed the importance of living by the rule of law.
You are a Jewish state, but you're also a democracy. And like the United States, you don't live by the rules of terrorists. You live by the rule of law. And when conflicts flare, you live by the law of wars. What sets us apart from the terrorists is we believe in the fundamental dignity of every human life. Israeli, Palestinian, Arab, Jew, Muslim, Christian, everyone. You can't give up what makes you who you are. If you give that up, then the terrorists win, and we can never let them win.
Well, Joe Biden also supported the Israeli Defense Forces' claims that the explosion at the hospital in Gaza last night was caused by a failed rocket attack on Israel by another terror group operating within Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Officials in Gaza, however, are still blaming the Israelis for the explosion, which they say killed nearly 500 people. Rishi Sunak today was speaking in Clacton-on-Sea, and he described the hospital explosion as shocking, but he called for calm heads as intelligence analysts established what happened exactly. Well, that comes as Downing Street says at least 7 British nationals were killed and 9 are still missing after Hamas's terror attack on Israel on the 7th of October. The terrorist group captured nearly 200 hostages and brought them back to Gaza on the 7th. The Prime Minister says the government is working around the clock to free hostages. Now, in other news, the rate of inflation remained at 6.7% last month as lowering food and drink prices rising were cancelled out by higher petrol and diesel prices. The Office for National Statistics says the inflation stayed at the same rate despite expectations it may fall again. The reading helps government departments calculate how much benefit payments should increase by next year, as well as having an effect on tax. And lastly, a red weather warning for rain and wind has been issued by the Met Office for parts of Scotland. That means very dangerous weather is expected, with extensive flooding likely to pose a risk to life. The weather warning runs from 6 o'clock tomorrow until noon on Friday, although Storm Barbette has already started to barrel in, affecting the Republic of Ireland. Flooding in Cork we've seen online already, and also flooding along the Devon coast. We'll keep you up to date on that one. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, as we were on air last night, we learned of a rocket attack on a hospital in Gaza. Claims that up to 471 people were killed. The media were very quick to jump to the assumption that it must have been an Israeli rocket that caused this human disaster. Since then, the Israelis have put out what they believe to be conclusive proof that actually it was a misfired rocket from Hamas themselves. I don't think either of us know quite the truth, but we will have tonight on with us a former spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority. I want to ask her to put her side of what happened last night and what's happened in the conflict to date, and perhaps more interestingly, where we go, which is significant because I fear the risk of escalation is getting worse. Iran are flexing their muscles. Israel genuinely now faces the prospect of a war on at least two fronts. And into all of this morning the US president, the man who throughout his career in the last couple of decades has done more than almost any other human being to trust Iran with their nuclear program, to trust they wouldn't develop nuclear weapons, in return for freeing up tens of billions of dollars. But today he came in to be a strong ally of Israel. But frankly, his performance says something to me. It says the reason that Putin has gone into Ukraine. It says the reason why Hamas did what they did on the 7th of October. If the Western world doesn't have strong leadership, the world is, in my view, a much more dangerous place. Just have a look at Biden talking about the rocket attack on the hospital yesterday.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
The other team? Team? What is this, baseball? Does Biden see moral equivalence between what the Israelis are doing and what Hamas have done on and since the 7th of October? It was the most extraordinary, clumsy, poor use of words. But it did reveal something interesting. It did reveal, because remember, everything he says is pretty much presented to him on cards. It's just when he goes off script that it goes wrong. What it does mean is that the intelligence that was given to Biden by the Americans also indicates that actually what happened at the Al-Ali hospital yesterday was a misfire from Hamas. Clearly, that's what American intelligence believes, but the use of the word team. No, what you should have said, President, is the other murdering terrorists did it. But no, that's not what he did. And then have a look at this, where he just completely and utterly loses his way.
You know, years ago, I asked the Secretary of State when he and I were working in the Senate to write something for him, and he said, he wrote a line that I think is appropriate. He said, it's not, we lead, not just, well, I won't go into it, I'll wait later. Taking too much time, but the point is this, that...
Just all over the place, lost his thread, disastrous, weak, and that, I think, is why the world is in as bad a place right now as it is. Do you agree with me? Is Biden fit to lead the free world? I don't think he is. I think he's causing many of these problems. But please give me your thoughts. Farage@gbnews.com. Let's go live to Tel Aviv to join GB News reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, a big push from the Israelis today. They put out voice recordings, allegedly of Hamas people speaking to each other. They put out the information about the time that Hamas rockets were fired and the time the hospital was hit. Do you agree with me that it looked like American intelligence was agreeing very much with Israel?
That was the main effort of Biden's mission today, I think, to reaffirm their support for the Israeli side. And Biden did land at a time of unprecedented tension in the region since this conflict started. Last night, when news broke of that explosion at the hospital, before the IDF had time to react and put out their side, the Arab world reacted with extreme condemnation. Within 15 minutes, the Palestinian authorities said it was a crime of genocide. And then Hezbollah called for an unprecedented day of rage today, and we have seen that. protests in Amman, in Jordan, fires outside the Israeli and American embassies in Beirut, and similar also in Istanbul in Turkey. And so Biden today trying to support the Israeli position from their own intelligence briefs that we saw this morning. Quite a comprehensive and compelling but not conclusive depiction of what happened last night. They showed both imagery intelligence and signals intelligence to claim that Palestinian Islamic Jihad were to blame for a misfiring rocket that struck the hospital car park. Today we've also seen footage from their car park. It is not a destroyed hospital as claimed by Hamas last night. There do not appear to be 500 casualties as claimed as well. The crater in the ground has also not mirrored the sort of explosion you'd expect from a missile. So a significant day of developments here, and also a win for Biden with the support for humanitarian aid moving into Gaza from Egypt. So a big moment for Washington's diplomacy there, at least.
Any indication, Charlie, from the US president about any increased military support? I know we've got the US Navy out there off the shores of Gaza. Any indication of direct military aid that would now come from the USA?
Well, he certainly said that they would stand by Israel in their time of need. And there was also a statement about the replenishing of the Iron Dome missile defense stocks. So the American taxpayer spends well over $1 billion a year on replenishing the missiles here. Each rocket costs $100,000, and we see several of them a day flying up in the air to intercept those rockets from the Gaza Strip, and also rockets fired from the north by Lebanese Hezbollah. So that was a significant step in terms of keeping Israel's air defense secured. And we do know that, well, while Biden was here, there were no rocket attacks. It was a relatively quiet time in Israel, in the center at least. But after he left, Biden said the mission he wanted to see in this region was peace. As Air Force One lifted up, the rocket barrages restarted in Tel Aviv. We've been in the shelter 3 times in the last 2 hours. So those Iron Dome missiles that he's seeking to replenish are almost certainly going to be very busy over the coming days.
And Charlie, I mean, how much debate is there about the prospect of a war on 2 fronts and perhaps even tensions also in the West Bank?
Well, they are definitely growing, those tensions in the West Bank. Some 64 people killed since the start of this war. Yesterday, a 17-year-old and a 72-year-old shot by police as the rage continued there in the current situation. We saw significant protests in Ramallah today after last night's reported explosion. But also this morning, there was a return to skirmishes on that border with southern Lebanon, with anti-tank guided missiles and shelling fired over, likely by Lebanese Hezbollah. Also some successful missile attacks landing in northern Israel as well. The Iron Dome failing to intercept all of them under heavy barrage. We also saw today, I think, away from Israel, 2 drones launched likely by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's main proxy force in the region, in Iraq. 2 intercepted in Iraq, with sources telling a news agency that they were off to target American forces. So very much a case that Iran is flexing its muscles as the world looks on, particularly the Arab world looks on with anger at the situation as that convoy gathers in the south of Israel for that planned invasion of the Gaza Strip. It is very tense here. People aren't sure what's going to happen next, but they are certain that more violence is likely to continue.
Final thought, Charlie, if I may. Israel warned people living in the north of the Gaza Strip to head towards the south of the Gaza Strip. Given that it was already one of the most densely populated places on earth, I'm imagining the situation in southern Gaza is very, very densely packed and difficult. And yet, no sign that Egypt will allow anyone from Gaza across their border.
Yes, foreign nationals so far not being allowed to exit. And yesterday, King Abdullah of Jordan said it was a red line for any refugees to be in Jordan or Egypt. This is a position of Arab solidarity. They feel as though if any Palestinians leave the Gaza Strip, they won't be allowed to return. And so there has been that effort by American diplomacy, successful today, to ensure some humanitarian aid can arrive for those who have fled, some best part of 1 million who have fled from the north to the south. There is a coastal humanitarian safe zone, and now this first bit of access of humanitarian aid from the Egyptian side through the Rafah crossing into Gaza, which will be so vitally needed as this situation descends into an untenable humanitarian crisis, so says the UN. But they also need people to leave the north should they continue those military bombardments on Gaza City. And let's not forget those hostages, at least 199 in Gaza City. They need to be able to access that area to try and retrieve them if diplomacy fails.
They certainly do. Charlie, thank you very much indeed. I'm now joined down the line from the USA by John Bolton, the former United States National Security Advisor under the Trump administration. John, thank you very much. Welcome again to the programme. A bit of an irony, it seems to me, that there is Joe Biden turning up in Israel saying, we're with you. We're your strongest allies in the world. And yet, this is the man who was vice president of the USA, endorsed and advertised the Iran nuclear deal. In August of this year, agreed a deal that will ultimately free up another $6 billion to Iran, which they're using to fund Hezbollah and Hamas.
Yeah, look, this is a real problem for the Biden administration. I think it was a positive development for him to give this strong signal of American support to Netanyahu and to come out today and make it clear that it was U.S. analysis that said that the terrible tragedy at the hospital in Gaza was caused by the misfire of a Palestinian missile, not an Israeli missile. But what the administration, ever since October the 7th, ever since the Hamas attack, has refused to acknowledge is that the real problem here is Iran. Hamas didn't decide this on its own. It's Iran that's the signal caller. It's Iran that supplied Hamas and Hezbollah, armed them, trained them, financed them. And so really, I view this, what happened in a couple of days ago, 10 days ago, was really an Iranian attack on Israel through its instrumentality, the terrorist group Hamas. And I think once people understand that, then you can see what the real threat to peace and security in the Middle East is. It's the mullahs in Tehran.
John, I can see it very clearly. I've seen it for years. Like you, I've been mystified by the Obama administration, by the European Union, and indeed, at times, the British government on this too. But clearly, the risk of escalation is now very real indeed. What, in your view, should the West now do?
Well, I think what's going to happen within the next 24 or 48 hours is that Israel is going to make good on its stated intention to eliminate Hamas. There will be entry into the Gaza Strip by substantial numbers of Israeli combat arms forces. And we're going to see more outrage from the usual suspects. But I think the magnitude of the tragedy that struck Israel is such that there's not a democratic government in the world that wouldn't do the same thing that Israel is about to do if they had faced the same attack. So the next step really, and this again is a judgment that will be made in Tehran, is whether Hezbollah in the north unleashes attacks on Israel. There have been reports over the past days the Syrian government has moved its forces toward the Golan Heights. So we'll see what the reaction is. I think Israel's prepared for this. I think one reason perhaps Israel didn't move as quickly as they might have was they wanted to be sure they were prepared, if necessary, to fight on a two-front basis. I think they probably are ready now. So the next step is Iran. I think they face a weak American president, notwithstanding that he's moved 2 carrier battle groups to the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm not sure that they don't read the hostage deal the same way you do. It was an act of weakness on the part of the administration. So I would say the risk of escalation is high, although fundamentally it's not escalation because Iran has been in this from the beginning.
Yeah. And John, one of the tragedies of this, and perhaps one of the reasons that it's happening, is the Trump administration. I know you fell out with Trump, but one of the achievements of the Trump administration were the Abraham Accords, the coming together of Israel and other states in that region, and the fact we were on the verge of Saudi Arabia and Israel coming to a very significant agreement, something Iran would never have wanted to see. And I personally think that's part of the reason behind the timing of all of this. But, John, would the world be a safer place if Donald Trump had still been in the White House?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I do agree with you on the Abraham Accords. They're a very significant reflection of change in the region as a whole. The Gulf Arab states and others had come to accept that Iran was the principal threat to their peace and security, as it was with Israel. And we had the confluence of strategic thinking that if the Gulf Arabs could get closer together with Israel, they would all benefit. And I think that's what produced the Abraham Accords. You are right to say that Iran viewed that as a real threat to them, and particularly the potential of an agreement with Saudi. So that's why it's so important to get the Arab population to appreciate that the real aggressor here is not Israel. It's Iran, because if you could make people aware of that, I think there'd be a substantial chance for the region as a whole to stand against Iran, and we might see the government there in real trouble. I think Biden has been a particularly weak president. I'm not sure how Trump would have reacted in a number of these areas, but I think there's no doubt Iran sees weakness in the Biden administration, and they're taking advantage of it.
Absolutely. John Bolton, as always, a pleasure to have you on the programme here at GB News. Thank you. Now, yesterday I told you that the Welsh Parliament, the Senate building, had banned GB News from their televisions. It is an act of the most astonishing censorship, maybe a warning shot for what a Labour-led United Kingdom might be like. Well, it's not good enough. So I'm off to Cardiff. Yes, absolutely. Farage at Large will be in Cardiff next Wednesday. We'll have a live audience, a venue as close to that Parliament as we can possibly get. I might even try to go into the building myself. Be interesting to see what the reaction is. If you want to come to Farage at Large in Cardiff next Wednesday to talk about why GB News has been banned in the Welsh Parliament, then go to gbnews.com. But do so very quickly. It'll sell out by the morning. In a moment, we're going to have a former spokeswoman for the Palestinian Authority. I'm going to ask her about this American intelligence and what the Palestinian side of the argument has to say.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm joined now live from the West Bank by Noor Oda, the first female spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority. Not in that role any longer, but coming on and joining us here on GB News. Good evening. Thank you for coming on and joining us. Now, obviously, whatever happened last night at that hospital in Gaza, a lot of people were killed. There's a dispute as to what the number is, but a lot of people were killed. American intelligence, and I accept that Israel is a strong ally of America, but American intelligence suggests that at 6:59, 10 rockets were fired by Hamas from a cemetery quite close to that hospital, and that it was one of those that misfired, not an Israeli rocket. And this is something that the Israelis have pushed very hard today. Do you have any evidence that it was an Israeli rocket?
Well, I can tell you that journalists have been trying to get Israel to provide them with anything convincing so that they can adopt its version of the story, which has changed at least 3 times. A spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office initially admitted that there was an Israeli airstrike and that it had targeted what he said were Hamas terrorists and that it had killed several. And then he deleted that post on X. And then the story changed again, and they accused Hamas, and then they accused Islamic Jihad. So it's a bit difficult to take them for their word, especially given the fact that they've lied in previous incidents. So
whatever they say, okay, they're fine. Whatever they say. My point was, what proof do you have that it was an Israeli rocket that landed? It looks like in a car park, rather than a direct hit on the hospital.
Right. Well, that hospital was housing 3,000 Palestinians, families, mainly women and children and men, who had sought refuge in this hospital, which has been, by the way, providing health services to people in Gaza for over 140 years. So it's a place close to everyone's heart. And the Israelis knew that it was housing civilians because on Saturday, as the Church of Canterbury confirmed, the Israelis bombed next to the hospital. They called up the doctors, told them that was their warning. They needed to leave the premises, and the doctors were very clear that they cannot abandon their patients, that those patients would die if they left them or tried to evacuate them. The Pan-Arab networks were live when the airstrike happened. It was one of many.
Well, look, there are airstrikes. I don't dispute.
Please let me finish.
I don't dispute that there are civilians in Gaza being killed and wounded for one moment. But whatever the historical rights and wrongs of this, and we could go back to 1948 or go back many years before that if we chose to.
Even before, yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Whatever the rights and wrongs, whatever the passion on either side of this argument, do you accept that what happened on October the 7th, on that Saturday morning, with the incursion into Israel by Hamas terrorists and the slaughter of 1,300 innocent people was a barbaric and terrible act?
Well, first of all, I'm here in my personal capacity, and I'm here as an analyst. So my personal opinion is really entirely irrelevant. The value, I would hope, of my interview, yes, because the value of my presence for your viewers and listeners is context, is knowledge of the issues, knowledge of the players, knowledge of the context. That's why I accepted to be your guest. And you had asked me what proof there was, and what I was trying to tell you is that there are several credible human rights organizations on the ground. They are collecting evidence, video video and photo and evidence on the ground. Nobody has been hindered from accessing the site. Nobody has been forbidden from collecting that evidence. And I have no doubt that there will be enough credible accounts from experts on what happened. But it's important for your viewers to know that in previous incidents where civilians were killed, and it was shocking, like the killing of Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh, our colleague and dear friend. In the beginning, Israel claimed it was Palestinian fire that killed her. And then they changed that story, and then they changed it again until they couldn't.
No, I understand. I understand that these arguments rage back and forth, and it goes on all of the time. I was simply asking about what happened on October the 7th with that incursion into Israel. But, I mean, when Hamas act and do what they do, are they legitimate representatives of the Palestinian people?
Well, no one group is a representative of the Palestinian people, just like no one party is a representative of all the British people, right? This is one group of many in Palestine. They have a following. And we have to explain also, to put in context, that Hamas is not just a military group, it is also a political group. It has a social and political agenda. And those two flanks of Hamas don't necessarily coordinate or know about each other's work. So the backing for Hamas would be on that basis, on the ideological agenda that it presented. And quite frankly, the Palestinian people, with Western pressure, have not been allowed to exercise their right to vote and choose their representatives for many years, because the West didn't want to try giving Palestinians
the last time
a free chance at elections again.
No, the last time they had an election, Hamas won the election, and quite comfortably. No, let me ask you. Let me ask you.
Is your argument that we can only have elections if the right people win? Is that how democracy works?
No. I'm merely
practice. So I'm just wondering.
I'm merely saying that they are seen by us to be, a strong representation of the Palestinian view, rightly or wrongly. A final thought, but the most important thought. We are where we are today. We are where we are today. There is a genuine risk of serious escalation and further heavy loss of life in Israel, in Gaza, and goodness knows where else in the region. What would you, in your personal capacity, what would you like to see happen next?
Well, I would like world leaders to be smarter, because right now what I see is complacency. What I see is lazy politics. What I see is a cop-out. Dumping more guns and more munitions, and clapping and cheering on as more bombs are dropped on 2.3 million people who are caged in an open-air prison is not the answer. And we've seen this time and again. We know it doesn't work. You cannot bomb your way into changing people's minds. The Americans couldn't do it. Others couldn't do it. It just wouldn't work. The core issue here is that an entire nation, the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, continue to be denied their right to be free, their right to have a country, a state of their own. And everybody wants to do anything but face that fact. And when the dust settles, when the Americans and the British go home after this war concludes, God knows with what kind of human toll, the Israelis will still have to do with the one inescapable truth, which is that Palestinians are still here and they still want to be free. And the only real and the easiest way for that conflict to end is to sit down and end the occupation, to be more invested in ending that occupation, and firing bombs, and demonizing an entire nation, and calling
many would say,
entire people human animals.
Many would say that actually they're not occupying Gaza at all. We could argue this forever, but
international
but thank you.
Legal experts would disagree.
But thank you for coming on and putting the Palestinian point of view, and in particular your own point of view. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Never, folks, let it be said that at GB News you don't hear all sides of the argument. You know where I stand firmly with Israel. And I was really surprised and disappointed that when I asked the question about the barbarity of October the 7th that happened through that incursion, that she simply refused to answer the question. But hey, you make your own minds up at home. Now, as we speak, security is being ramped up in London as pro-Palestine protesters are holding a vigil outside Downing Street. The Stop the War coalition have gathered. They've gathered, this coalition. It's looking like a pretty big crowd is building up. They started at 5 p.m. They're calling it an emergency protest after what happened at the Al Ali hospital in Gaza. The Met Police said, we are aware of a vigil that is due to be held. We will have additional officers deployed to the area to ensure the event takes place safely. Well, look, there we are. I think we're going to see an awful lot more of these demonstrations in British cities over the course of the next few weeks. In a moment, let's talk about net zero. The government says it could cost $1 trillion. Others think it could be much more. But is net zero even achievable?
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie, second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
The boss of MI5, Ken McCallum, says there are now tens of thousands of companies in this country under siege from China as they try to steal all of our industrial secrets. This will come as no surprise to Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, Conservative Member of Parliament for Chingford and Woodford Green, and of course former Conservative Party leader. Ian, you've kind of been telling us this for the last few years.
Yeah, no, it's no surprise at all to me. Our desire to get closer to China is a disaster. And the reality is that all China wants from us is the stuff that they can't get back in China, which is technology and our secrets. Our connection to the US is very important. They've completely and utterly made British universities almost completely dependent on Chinese money, so that now they don't know what to do if there aren't Chinese students coming in because they pay very high fees. We see Chinese students, many of them coming from universities that we know educate the security services back in China, who end up sometimes on defense contracts here as postgrad students. So, we have been very slack here, and the security services literally have been frustrated about this because politicians now refuse to call, well, the government refuses to call China as a threat. They call it an epoch-defining challenge, which is just bizarre, really.
So effectively, Ian, Chinese students coming into Britain and then staying, that's the way that China gets its spies into our country. That's what you're saying.
Well, it's part of the way. There's lots of other ways they do it. The Confucius Institute should have been banned. We were told they were going to be banned. They're not banned. They offer up free services on culture and language to universities. Some universities take them on, and they seem to end up spending their time mostly spying on Chinese students to make sure they don't do the wrong thing or get too close to British students. So many, particularly the Hong Kong students, feel very fearful of it, and they drive them out of the debates. It's really appalling. So all round, you've got Chinese people in these companies. You've seen huge efforts to buy up British companies, British technology, not just us, by the way, across Europe. America's been faster on the draw on this. They banned a lot of this. We were very slow to take that up. We have the powers now, but we are very reluctant, it appears to me, to upset the Chinese government in any shape or form, which is mad, really, because at the end of it all, and I was going to make this point because you had a very interesting interview I was watching just now with the representative of the Palestinian authorities, who, by the way, said she couldn't give an opinion because she wasn't here for herself, and then promptly gave a very strong opinion at the end. So it struck me as rather bizarre, that, but okay. But the main point is that China is also heavily connected, and I believe creating a thing called an axis of authoritarian states. North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, Syria now involved in it. And Iran is up to their eyeballs in the terrible attack that took place last week, deliberately to smash any rapprochement with Saudi. And Saudi has now had a rapprochement with Iran. So, you can see whose hand is in all of this.
I know, and China brokering that rapprochement, extraordinary. Final thought on this. We've criticised Rishi Sunak before from kind of backtracking from the words he used when he ran from being Conservative leader to softening them. Where does Labour stand on China?
Good question. I'm not altogether certain. I've got very good colleagues in the Labour Party who are part of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, which I set up. Now got 32 countries, by the way, from Japan to the USA, all concerned about the rise of China and the power of China and the negative attitudes that China takes. So everyone concerned about that. Lots of people in the Labour Party are very concerned, and members of IPAC. But I don't know for certain exactly where the Labour Party stands on this.
No. Well, that's a question we're going to ask them. Sir Ian, as ever, thank you for joining us on the programme. Shocking, I'm afraid, but predictable. Now, Ross Clark is the author of Not Zero and a prolific journalist on energy. Now, net zero, we've got to get there by 2050. It's going to cost, some estimates say, well, the government says it'll cost £1 trillion, but that's not really the half of it, is it?
Well, the government doesn't actually say it'll cost £1 trillion. Right. The Treasury refused to come up with an estimate because it said it couldn't be done. There's too many unknowns, too many technologies have to be invented. It was the National Infrastructure Commission, a quango, which today came up with this £1 trillion figure. Of course, it's a lot of money, but it's also complete fantasy because, there are so many technologies which have yet to be developed properly, yet to be scaled up, on which we will be completely reliant to reach net zero. I mean, take one example. Today, the government wants to decarbonise the national grid by 2035 and power ourselves mostly by wind and solar. Well, to do that, you need backup because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. At the moment, we use gas. If we don't have gas, what do we have? There's possibilities. Maybe we have gas with carbon capture and storage, or we have battery storage, but all these things cost a tremendous amount of money.
And it doesn't yet work, any of it, does it?
Well, these things work, but it's a difference. There's a difference between having something that works that actually makes commercial sense when scaled up. That's the big...
Michael Kelly who is recently retired as a professor of technology and electrical engineering at Cambridge University. He thinks that we're going to need to produce about 5 times the amount of electricity that we are today by 2050 to make all of this work. He thinks it could cost between 4 and 5 trillion. And I just think, whether it's 1 trillion, 4 trillion, 5 trillion, people sitting at home think, well, this number's so big, I can't even begin to get my head around it. But isn't the truth of it, actually, they're the ones that are going to be paying for this?
We're all going to be paying, aren't we? Because, you know, I mean, the National Infrastructure Commission today, for example, said, well, we'll all turn over to heat pumps and the government will have to subsidise them to the tune of £7,000 per household. We'll all get £7,000 per household to fit a heat pump.
So
well, where's that money going to come from?
It's going to be £6 billion a year.
It's going to come from
£6 billion a year just for putting heat pumps on the side of, as you say, all this talk about government money. It's not government money, it's our money, it's taxpayers' money that's going to pay for it all. Ross, you know, you've been writing about this for a long time. You've appeared several times with me and on this channel to try and talk some sense into the net zero argument, that it just isn't achievable, it isn't affordable, it may be desirable, but it just isn't going to happen this way. With what we saw from Sunak the other day, are there any signs of political change yet?
Well, there are. I mean, what Rishi said was a limited retreat on 1 or 2 measures,
tiny.
Gas boilers and electric cars and so on. But, you know, as these targets come, you know, into the near future, we're going to have serious problems. And the one really to watch is this 2035 target for decarbonising the grid. Labour Party wants to do it by 2030 and yet has, you know, no idea of how it solves this intermittency problem of how to back up electricity supply when there's no wind and solar power. So John Armitt, who heads the National Infrastructure Commission, he said once, on record as saying, well, it's like President Kennedy, you know, said at the beginning of the 1960s, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s, which, of course, America did achieve. Well, you know, what people don't tend to liken it to is NASA's promise later in the 1960s to put a man on Mars by 1980, which still hasn't happened. The world is full of technologies which we hoped would come into fruition but failed to arrive on time.
Ross Clark, as ever, the voice of reason. I think the great British public are waking up to this. I think Westminster are very, very behind where the centre of gravity is beginning to go. In a moment, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Hartlepool has caused outrage. She says that she's besieged by asylum seekers and thinks people who've come here illegally should be deported. We'll speak to her live in just a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I told you the other day about what happened in Hartlepool on Sunday morning. The fact that a man died outside a house that had been housing asylum seekers. He has, of course, this guy's been charged. He will appear in court. We'll find out more when it comes to court. But a bigger issue was raised today by Jill Mortimer. She's been the Member of Parliament, a Conservative Member of Parliament for Hartlepool since 2021. And here she was, standing up today in the House of Commons at Prime Minister's Questions.
Every week my office is besieged by asylum seekers. My staff are intimidated by young men. The fact is most of them are illegal migrants who should be expelled. Enough is enough. I want these people out of Hartlepool now.
I would like to reassure her that this government is doing everything we can to tackle illegal migration and the harm it causes by removing those with no right to be here in the UK. We have excellent long-standing relationships to return people to many countries. We are returning thousands of people more this year than we have done in the past, and we will continue to use every avenue at our disposal to ensure that it is only this country and this government who decides who come here and not criminal gangs.
Well, that's an answer we've heard over and over and over. I'm not convinced by it, and not many are. Jill Mortimer joins me here. Besieged by asylum seekers. Tell us what you meant.
We have an office in Hartlepool, and my staff regularly have groups of young men outside, knocking on the door, ringing the bell, laying on the bell. If they don't answer, because we can see on the cameras that it is more asylum seekers, they will ring the phones to try and catch us out. They will stand at the end of the street and look down.
What do they want?
My staff. They want my staff to give them leave to remain, which of course my staff can't do that. I have a fantastic team of very dedicated people in Hartlepool. We've undertaken 9,000 pieces of casework and correspondence since I came in 21. Nothing had been done in Hartlepool for 57 years for people. We've come in, they do amazing work, and they shouldn't have to put up with this. When they contact the Home Office to get an update on these people who knock on the door to find out what's happening with their applications, very often they'll find out that these people have been refused asylum on more than one occasion previously.
Yeah. And you've got, obviously, this was a private house from which this knife attack was launched, but you've got migrant hotels in Hartlepool as well.
We don't have any migrant hotels.
No hotels?
The council...
Because there are plenty in the North East.
Oh, yeah. The council have done an excellent job, actually, of integrating people into our community. But very sadly, I think what we've got to remember here is that someone has lost their life. There is a family grieving in my town, and that's what has provoked me to have to stand up and say what my constituents would want me to say.
On the broader level, you were saying basically people who come here illegally should be expelled.
Of course. I mean, Nigel, I'm quite a moderate person.
I mean, should they go through the asylum process?
Well, if somebody comes and says they have a claim, you have no choice. Legally, and sadly, these people get all the right lefty lawyers backing them, but you have to take through a process and check. But, the ones that I've got the real issue with, the people that have gone through that process and are still here.
But the problem is, and it's not lefty lawyers, it's the Conservative Party who, despite being the party that adopted Brexit, want to keep us in the European Convention on Human Rights, and that's what the lefty lawyers lean on. Can the Conservative Party, has it got the guts to deal with ECHR?
I think they do. I've got a lot of confidence in the Home Office team we have at the moment under Suella, with Rob Jenrick and Sarah Dines. I think we've got a very good team in there. And I think today I had to speak truth to power, because sometimes you have to be persuasive to make... I think there is the political will on our side of the benches to do this. I mean, look, it's a straight choice. You've got us or Labour. The other side, they block everything we try to do to make this problem, get it solved. And you know, if you're in a straight choice, it's only the Conservatives that are going to be able to do anything, and we are battling to do it.
Well, I'm convinced that you mean what you say. I'm less convinced that the government are actually going to do anything about it.
Well, that's why I will continue to speak truth to power.
Well, and no doubt you'll become, you know, a regular in The Guardian and on Channel 4 News, who will give you a very, very hard time. Interesting thought. Stay with me. Humza Yousaf, the First Minister of Scotland, said yesterday that up to 1 million people in Gaza may have to be offered asylum status, and making the point that Scotland would be very happy to have them. Funny, isn't it? After the Syrian war, Saudi Arabia wouldn't take a single migrant because they were worried about the terror threat. Egypt takes the same view, and yet the political consensus here, Jill, is that anyone that wants to come pretty much can.
Well, I think that, not from my perspective, it isn't, and I don't think that's the perspective of my colleagues either.
No, well, it's the First Minister of Scotland, and that was what he was suggesting. And the man, the Iranian, who brought 10,000 people illegally into Britain, was jailed in Brussels today. He's been given an 11-year sentence. He'll serve half of that. Not exactly the life sentence promised to us by Priti Patel and other Home Secretaries, albeit that was in Belgium. I'm done. Let's have a look at the weather.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Storm Babette arrives over the next 24 hours, bringing with it exceptional rainfall for eastern Scotland in particular. Red warning has been issued. Here's Babette for the rest of Wednesday, moving into central parts of the UK. It's been a wet day for southern areas, but that rain's now moving into North Wales, the Midlands, Northern England and Northern Ireland overnight, especially heavy across Northern Ireland with the risk of 30 to 50 or even 60 millimetres by the end of the night, and so that could cause some disruption by dawn. Otherwise, it's drying up a little towards the south. It stays blustery, it stays cloudy, and as a result, it's going to be a mild start to Thursday, but it is going to be an unpleasant start for many. Wet and windy weather, strong gusts of wind associated with Storm Babette, but then increasingly wet and windy for central and northern Scotland in particular, with, in places, 70 or even 80 mile-per-hour wind gusts, and that wind driving heavy and persistent rain into eastern Scotland in particular. Angus and Aberdeenshire, seeing that rainfall really build up over the next 48 hours, up until the weekend, with, in places, 200 to 250 millimetres of rainfall. In one or two spots could see twice October's average rainfall fall in just a few days. That would cause serious amounts of flooding combined with strong winds. That's why there's a red warning. Stay up to date with forecasts and warnings.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.